When the caravan left Arabar, the new guard was confused. They were travelling the wrong way. Surely, to get to Inarelith. Strange enough, the trader was not taking a barge down the Nagaflow River, but the Naga water was considered by many to be dangerous any farther than Kagar. However, the caravan was headed up the coast of the Vilwan Reach toward the Sea of Fallen Stars, stopping at Champ to pick up a large amount of Samra glass bottles, empty, with leather jackets on them. The new guard thought better of asking questions about cargo, and merely asked if there was any change of destination as he had business after with a family in Shah. The merchant just scowled at him, opened a trunk and handed him an arrow. It was a very long arrow, longer than he was used to, and he had seen many. He asked if it was Furbolg made, and the merchant shook his head. "We're delivering these bottles to the elves along the old road, through the Chondal Wood." "Yes, don't look so shocked. I travel the old road now with some safety afforded to me by my relationship and friendship with these elves, because they fill these bottles with wine, and I trade it with the people who made that arrow, which I took from the side of this wagon many years ago." The guard turned it over in his hands, imagining the power of the shaft and the strength needed to draw a bow that fired it. "This fletching looks elven, but this thing is as long as a halfling lance." "Yes, I pray we never have to deal with the centaurs, lad. As if we do, pray that they just want to buy something. I didn't even know there's centaurs in these parts." "Not always, but they have the habit of moving around, so keep your wits about you. I'm not paying you to get us both killed." "No, sir." Hey there, everybody. AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. I'm happy to bring you a rather detailed exploration of the ecology of the Centaur today, and I'll be drawing from a lot of different sources, including one of the most detailed articles from Dragon Magazine, spread across issues 103 and 105, although 105 was mainly just an errata, called the Centaur Papers, written by two authors who submitted articles about centaurs independently. And the articles were combined, so this is the work of Stephen Innes and Kelly Adams. Centaurs have been with us from ancient Greek mythology. They've always been included in Dungeons & Dragons. They're a part of the majority of Dungeons & Dragons world settings, particularly the world of Kryn. The Abanasinian Centaur, the Crystalmere Centaur, the Enscape Centaur, and the Wendell Centaur are part of the Dragonlance setting. But the Forgotten Realms has had centaurs for a very long time, since the time of dragons and giants. In fact, it may be that the centaurs travelled to the world of Toril from the Feywild at around the same time that the elves did. Because of their legendary strength and resilience, the Centaurs suffered terribly during the final years of the war between the dragons and giants. They also suffered significant loss during the Four Crown Wars between the elves, and have resented the rise of humans, particularly how the humans have laid claim to former elven lands. There's a pretty simple reason Centaurs don't like humans and dwarves very much though, and it's cities. They don't like how humans and dwarves cover the natural landscape completely with their artificial structures. They consider it to be kind of disgusting and selfish and an affront to nature itself. Centaurs don't build houses. Whatever they build for a specific and temporary purpose, such as a shelter from a storm, and that's typically taken down again afterwards and either carried with them or it's just made from materials around them. Dwarves remind them very much of the giants, and it perplexes them why the dwarves have so strongly taken on the language, style, and in some ways the culture of the giants, who kept them as slaves for hundreds of generations. They also think living underground is very unhealthy. It's just a weird thing to do. That being said, they respect the craftsmanship of the dwarves and the human desire to make the world safe for all peaceful folk. For the most part, centaurs can travel freely through the human-dominated lands, so the centaurs just tend to avoid dealing with them, even when moving through a human territory. So the humans, for the most part, unless they go looking for them, don't even know the centaurs are around. They make their way through the temperate forests of the heartlands of Faerun. There are tribes who dwell in the Anarok Desert as well, and with the recent return of that land to a more hospitable climate, the Hulinia have been interacting a lot more with the Bedine tribes as of late, having formed some strong bonds in battle against the returned and now vanquished Empire of Shade. So if you want to include the Hulinia in your adventures in the Anarok Desert, there's desert-adapted centaurs, which are quite interesting. Humans and dwarves are far more likely to encounter centaur pairs, or the rare, more solitary centaur adventurers, sages, and hermits of their people. A centaur pair is the equivalent of a human cavalier. The fealty of a centaur cavalier is given to their herd, specifically to the ruler of the herd. Like a human cavalier, the centaur pair must keep honour, bravery, and the chivalric code as their most important guides. A pair must protect their herd from outside dangers and keep harmony within the herd itself. Plus, Peers are thus law enforcers and make up the officers of the elite corps of their militia. I should add that this is it's common for the Centaurs of the central lands of Faerun, but it's more barbaric tribes in the steppes of the Far East and Horde lands. They're less inclined to have the tradition of peers, so for them they have a more heroic status that they attribute to the most well-regarded warriors in their herd. Basically, it's the folk hero background. Centaur cavaliers come from prestigious bloodlines and hold very high social status in Centaur societies. With this prestige comes responsibility. Peers must show extreme expertise in the arts of warfare and must display style and grace. They are almost immune to fear, can resist magical effects that target the mind, and are highly skilled with the use of the shield, maces, bows, spears, swords, and daggers. As with most centaurs, they don't like to wear armour, not only because it's heavy and cumbersome, but because they tend to overheat when wearing it, and they really don't like the idea of drowning because they're covered in metal and leather. For the most part, it's kind of useless. You can easily recognise a pair by their tail, which is always groomed to appear regal and commanding. The feathers and trinkets that denote their rank are clearly displayed. They're dedicated to a life of glory and bravery, honour and chivalric traditions, but only to other centaurs. They feel no obligation to go out of their way to help non-centaurs, unless doing so will also benefit their own people in some way. While the role of peer sounds similar to that of a paladin, it's not the same, and the centaurs are not particularly religious. They have their own fey gods, primarily Skerrit, known as the Forest Walker, the hunter and protector of the sylvan lands. He watches over the centaur communities and always aspires to maintain the natural balance of things. This is one of the reasons centaurs are on good terms with unicorns and Pegasi. Skerrit's divine realm is the house of nature, home of the Cardinal Celestials, with a permanent portal to Elysium and Aravandor. So very much a part of the elven divine court. The Cardinal Celestials are animal forms, so the petitioners who go to that place gradually, even if they start off as humanoids, they turn into animal form Celestials at some point. The Centaurs do not pay a great amount of heed to the gods, and those who do usually worship Sylvanus, not Skerrit. Sylvanus is far more active, so he has a more active clergy. Or they choose one of the elven nature gods. A lot of Barriors worship Skerrit, as do Wemmick, but only vaguely. They kind of prayed to the whole of nature pantheon, and each part is of equal importance to everything else. So it's as balanced as the rest of the nature pantheon's mottos. Human sages don't tend to depict the centaurs in a very favourable light. They refer to their tendency towards drunkenness and violence, relative barbarism, impulsiveness, and lack of emphasis on education. The humans and dwarves tend to see centaurs as unpredictable and untrustworthy. This is not entirely without precedent, but it's an unfortunate error to apply this description to all centaurs, as we shall find out. Physically, centaurs are impressive. They have the head, arms and torso of a humanoid, looking somewhat more like a human than an elf, but not exactly the same as either. They have thick and lustrous hair. Men tend to grow a full beard. The hair of their tail is longer than on the hair on their head, but is the same colour. The average height of a adult male is 7 feet tall, or a short or teenage centaur would be around 6 feet tall, and a truly enormous centaur warrior can reach 9 feet tall. Of course, their horse lower body adds a lot of weight, so they are classed as large creatures and weigh between 1,000 and 2,500 pounds, but average around 1,200. They are lean and muscular, a lot more flexible and graceful than one would expect if they've only seen pictures of centaurs. Watching a centaur actually move, they don't seem unnatural in any way. They can even climb trees and are pretty good swimmers, although it takes them a lot of movement to climb up a surface, a bit more than a humanoid. They can bend down and touch the ground with their fingers without bending their knees, and they can easily twist around and braid their own tail hair. So that gives you some idea of how flexible they actually are, much more flexible than a horse. Internally, they're quite interesting. They have 2 hearts, each twice the size of a human heart, one in the human side, half of their body and one in the lower half of their body, the horse half, and 2 sets of lungs, all of which beat and breathe together. The human abdomen is mostly fat and muscle, and they are less prone to damage there. Overall, the organ size is smaller proportionately in them than to humans. However, their extra mass they have makes them much more vulnerable to falling damage, which is doubled for a centaur. It can certainly look very impressive to a human or an elf when a centaur simply pulls an arrow out of their body because it just hasn't hit any vital organs. Also, they don't accumulate fat in the same way that humanoids do, so they usually look pretty fit and healthy even when elderly. Their upper body is a bit more rough and robust than a human. Their strong jaw, wide cheekbones, high-bridged nose, and broad teeth give them a certain equine appearance. While their voices have the same pitch as humans, they're a lot louder, well, they're capable of being a lot louder, with an impressive lung capacity, so they can really bellow, but also they can easily strain their vocal cords by doing so. They have a pretty good sense of smell, particularly when it comes to any horse-type animals in the area. They can smell a female centaur in heat from up to a mile away in optimal conditions. They can smell if a regular horse has passed by within 20 minutes of their location. They do not have the sensitive eyesight of their elven friends, nor can they see in the dark any better than a human can. However, they have slightly better ability to track movement with their eyesight, and their hearing is generally a bit better thanks to simply living away from the noisy cities for all of their lives. Their skin and hair coloration is the same as any sort of horse breeds, with about the same rate of occurrence, and their eyes are usually brown or hazel, but they can be the same as any human eye colour. Female centaurs are fertile monthly, with pregnancies occurring usually in the spring or early summer. The gestation time is 11 months, and the baby is called a foal. Centaur children are only rarely twins, usually it's single birth, and giving birth is not as difficult or as dangerous as it is for humanoids. The foals can stand within an hour of birth and have the torso size of a 4-year-old human baby, and yes, they do have a belly button in the same place that human children do, because the umbilical cord comes from the human torso bit of their body. The mothers kneel down to breastfeed. They do so a lot more than humanoid mothers do, and foals, when born, have a fine coat of downy hair all over their body, with a thicker hair on their head and their tail, and their body hair will reduce and thicken to the fur covering the lower part of their body and legs within the first 2 months, so they lose the downy birth hair that they have within the first 2 months. By the age of 1 year, they will be learning their first words, and by 2 years, they can run as fast as an adult. They have tremendous appetites in their first years of life. They grow quickly, so mothers do supplement the diet that their foals have with milk from other mammals, so they do domesticate and milk other mammals, and they will feed foals butter and cheese as well. The 5th edition version of the Centaur has reduced lifespan compared to older editions. Originally they could live to 135 years, now they reach adult maturity by 16 years and rarely live much past the age of 60. So you have some leeway there if you wanted to make this a characteristic that separates the more civilized centaurs from the more wild herds. Say, Centaurs of Chondath live longer than ones from the steppes of the Horde lands out in the east. Centaur boys are called colts. They mature at age 19 into stallions. Not physically, but that's a social maturity there. They're regarded as stallions by the age of 19. Girls are called fillies, and they mature into mares at the age of 17. They certainly don't find the terminology offensive, nor do they find any comparison to a horse to be very offensive, because they consider horses to be pretty superior to humanoids, although it's wise not to push it because they do take offence and they can easily snap a human's arm like a twig. Centaurs are strong. They are large creatures and they gain a racial bonus of +2 to their strength score, so they can be tremendously strong, and a +1 to their constitution, so they're pretty tough. They weigh 6 times as much as a human, but only need to eat about 4 times as much food as a human does. Even so, that's a lot of food. Also, they can't eat grass and coarse hay and stuff like horses can. They have strong jaws and teeth, but they love to eat large amounts of fresh alfalfa, dandelions, raw turnips, peas, the whole plant, including the peas, the pod, and the vine itself, all sorts of berries, lots of different types of flowers, many of which humans or even elves don't find very palatable. They eat acorns. They also eat all sorts of other plants, and particularly coarse breads that other species have a very rough time eating. They eat a lot of grains, particularly oats. You can usually find dozens of oat cates tucked away in pouches that they snack on during the day. About 70% of their total dietary intake will be oats or oat-based foods. About 30% will be meat, dairy, and vegetables. Plus, they do eat sugar beet pulp and oat straw and wash it down with about 5 to 12 gallons of fluid every day. Mostly water, but also a lot of wine and beer. They love dairy products, milk, cream, cheese, and butter. They also love honey, and centaurs also eat meat, a lot of it on average. The typical centaur will eat around 22 pounds total of food per day. When they're not adventuring or away from the comforts of their herd, they eat less. but and more concentrated food. Centaurs love to gather and prepare foods. They also love to talk about food. It occupies a lot of their day, which is one of the reasons that they get on very well with halflings. Plus, halflings don't disturb the landscapes too much with their settlements and share a love of all things that grow. So centaurs are welcome in halfling communities. The centaurs tend to eat less often and consume more in one sitting than any horse would. They also have a huge tolerance for tough food and food that is very sour and bitter. Reading from the original Dragon magazine article, which is very good, we have a very good description of the general psychology of the centaurs and their culture. So I'm just going to read from that article with my own notes thrown in here and there as I go. Centaurs are self-willed to the point of being stubbornness. They are some even more individualistic and uncivilized groups of centaurs than humans. They have little regard for custom and precedent and have few laws. The laws just concern themselves and proper behaviour, which are largely related to the survival of the herd. Often they're seen as liars because they're more apt to agree to the general spirit of an agreement than by its particular terms, which they'll abandon altogether if keeping it seems harmful to themselves or others. They have no business for law over practicality. Few centaurs are good at either ruling or being ruled. They do not practice slavery. They find the concept abhorrent, and they are rebellious slaves themselves. They don't tolerate captivity. Like elves, they are unlikely to treat others differently because of higher or lower station. Such behaviour is often offensive to other races, and combined with the centaur's casual contempt for law and tradition, and its natural stubbornness, this trait has proved unfortunate on more than one occasion, particularly in human-dominated kingdoms. And of course, dwarves who love lawfulness. Perhaps the same bulk and strength that makes centaurs so independent also gives them the security to deal openly with the world. Centaurs are poor liars and poor at discovering a lie. Dishonesty is not really a part of their culture. They're literally big-hearted, and they frown on such traits as jealousy and dishonesty and place great value on an open and generous character. This does not mean that thieving is unknown in centaurs, but it does mean that if they practice banditry, it will be entirely above board, and the victims will probably not lose more than they could afford. The centaurs generally are too good-natured to plot serious harm except in warfare, and they go to war to defend themselves. Misunderstandings often arise. However, the centaur concept of ownership differ from those of humans. Centaurs have a low regard for money, and they give it and take it freely. For them, it's just a means to an end. Also, while they understand the ownership of individual items well enough, they don't recognise claims of land ownership unless the land is actually currently in use. They have little regard for national boundaries, and centaurs are known to break down fences and destroy or deface boundary markers. They find them offensive. They find such things on land that they're accustomed to wandering over to be an affront to their freedom. Intangible and abstract things have little hold for centaurs, not for lack of understanding, but for lack of appreciation. They prefer direct and earthy things such as food and drink and practical tools. They're lusty. They have great games involving running and wrestling rather than thinking. Their jokes are more often practical than verbal. They like a good slapstick joke or a prank or a pratfall. They don't play chess or checkers, but they're likely to throw a ball or chase an animal. Gold and jewels are considered for their looks rather than for what they can buy, and are easily traded for something more directly appreciable for their novelty. When they are just sick and tired of looking at a thing, it loses its value. Modesty is an intangible for which centaurs have no use. They enjoy amusing themselves by embarrassing non-centaurs. Because they're so large, centaurs have no room to be shy, particularly amongst themselves. They have no discomfort regarding nudity and prefer to remain uncovered whenever the climate permits. So, yeah, all the artwork that you see is relatively true. Breeding is a natural part of life, although a mare and stallion will usually carry on such activities in private. They are not disturbed or shocked when they are watched. It's unavoidable. The human view of centaurs and their drinking habits is a distorted one, due to the fact that the most commonly seen centaurs are young males who are in town on holiday, squandering their money at wine merchants, brawling, staggering up and down the streets in and out of houses and shops. The behaviour of these fiery young stallions away from their band is hardly typical. Basically, they're like soldiers away on shore leave. But the fact remains that centaurs appreciate drink more than humans do and are strongly affected in proportion to their weight. Once drunk, a centaur remains so for a long time as a result of its large size. If it were not so expensive a habit, they would be a good number of four-legged alcoholics. Centaurs are attracted to a number of other drugs as well, most notably tobacco, though smoking's not uncommon. Most prefer to chew cured tobacco leaves, which are considered a delicacy. So if you come across a field of tobacco somewhere, it's probably tended to by halflings who are trading it with centaurs. From the earliest years, centaurs are accustomed to standing on their own 4 feet, and they do not enjoy riding or being carried. Like they don't consider getting on a cart and going anywhere to be any efficient means of transport. They're particularly suspicious of boats and would certainly only trust an animal to pull them somewhere as a last resort. They need to keep their feet firmly on the ground and be able to move swiftly, and centaurs dislike unstable ground, heights, and dark and enclosed spaces. They do not like any sort of uncertainty, preferring to control as much of their situation as possible. However, humans have a number of stories illustrating the violent nature of the horsefolk, but centaurs are in fact no more violent than any other races. What makes them seem so tough is that often people overestimate the robusticity of non-centaurs, so that the centaurs just tend to accidentally break people. Horseplay is common amongst centaurs, and they are baffled that others are reluctant to join in their games, but also they're equally remorseful when they break somebody's arm or leg. Centaurs' faults are likely to be those of excess, too much love for food or drink or other pleasures, too emotional a response, too volatile a mood. In this, even sophisticated centaurs resemble some human primitives, acting without thinking and trusting to strength instead of wit. As centaurs are fiercely independent and prideful creatures, affront can be taken in the manner common to humans, i.e. suggesting comments regarding their ancestry, insults regarding family relations, etc., cousins, etc., as well as a few common only to centaurs, such as insulting their running style or that sort of thing. Any insult regarding a stallion's virility is sufficient reason for an immediate duel, possibly even a fatal one. A stallion is also very protective of its hindquarters and is apt to kick first and ask questions later. They don't like people walking around behind them. It is decidedly unwise to pat a male centaur on the rump unless he knows very well who you are and where you are. Rude remarks about one's tail, as noted elsewhere, can also prove hazardous, particularly if it's a peer and somebody's making fun of their feathers without understanding what they actually mean. Such as if you insult a feather which happens to denote that the peer took on a dragon, they may kill you. Assertions that centaurs are completely lawless are false. Nonetheless, it is true that most centaurs know very little permanent organisation larger than bands of less than 100 adults. This may well be just as well because any adult is allowed to say what it wants in tribal decisions, so they're very democratic, almost anarchistic, and usually they have a long opinion about things. Few things are settled without shouting and confusion. Fortunately, the majority of a herd will usually follow the advice of one or two individuals best informed on the matter, most often either the war chief or the matriarch or both. And the war chief is simply the most skilled and popular warrior whose advice has been useful in the past. The rest of the centaurs will follow their lead in war, and they are expected to settle disputes over cattle or quarrels between males that would otherwise turn into a duel, because the war chief will basically say, "We can't spare you, we need you." The matriarch is simply the most respected female, often the chief cleric of the tribe as well. She's the one who's most versed in healing lore, family history, relations, and knowledge of the personalities of the people in her tribe. The others turn to her for judgment in more serious matters, such as where to seek water in a drought, because she basically has the best knowledge of their previous migrations through a territory. Whether to wage a war, how to settle a dispute between households. It's in this nature of centaur life that males are less often to live to gain wisdom and lore, so the opinion of the matriarch carries a great deal of weight. The males just don't have time for that sort of thing. They're dealing with other threats in the natural world. Centaur tribes are more often less than 100 members. Those who are more than 100 members tend to fragment due to duplication of leadership. So there will be, if there's a faction that forms, they'll just go off on their own. So there's seldom more than one war chief and one matriarch in a herd. As with human nomads, There are nearly twice as many females as males in many centaur communities due to the hazards of the wildlands. Still, because centaurs are polygamous, they tend to have some males with no wives and others, the more wealthy or otherwise popular, with many wives. Centaurs being as they are, this presents fewer problems than might be imagined. The custom of polygamy persists in more settled regions, though there are large numbers of unattached males as a result, but that's only fitting because usually they're practicing on warfare or off fighting monsters or scouting ahead and things like that, and they just come back to basically have fun and get looked after by the community. Most centaur males tend to herding their livestock, warfare, necessary or otherwise, hunting, and destruction of dangerous predators, which takes a great deal of their time. They are well respected for doing so, and it's just unthinkable that a young male unattached centaur would not defend the herd. Females perform many basic crafts for the community, from weaving to smith work, calling on the stallions of the herd to help with the heavier and simple tasks. So if they need to make buckles or horseshoes and things like that, it's generally the females who are doing that more skilled craft work because they have the time to pass on the information to other young females. Young fillies may wander, but females with young children remain near the settlement or encampment for mutual protection and supplies, and the rest of the tribe is very protective of them. Some centaur bands are dangerously close to extinction, with fewer than 80 members to set against the hundreds of humans, demi-humans, and humanoids that are in that territory that they're moving through. Because they are polygamous and have flexible mating customs, the centaurs can afford to lose a few males, but childbearing females in their foals are precious. Strangers, even friendly ones, are likely to count fewer children than there are the balance behind having been hidden, so they hide their children and offspring. This is partly in the nature of centaurs, but the major reason is probably that female centaurs are more nearly equal to males in strength and speed than it is so with humans. Female centaurs are likely to have potter's wheels, smithies, looms, that sort of thing that they've passed on for their mothers, just as males are likely to have received cattle or other livestock from their fathers. The females hold most of the dwellings in the community, but the lone males may construct places of their own. They may not live with a parent or sister. They may move around like hunting shacks, sort of places that they go. Though small bands of centaurs are often nomadic, larger communities may build homes and regular places that they return to. So this may take the form of standing stones or places where they can construct shelters relatively easily. So the largest communities may consist of over 100 individuals with a total of 20 to 30 households within them. Centaur villages, whether temporary or permanent, are haphazard affairs. Houses and tents are placed at the whim of their owners, sort of equidistantly spaced from each other, with groupings of people who are more familiar with each other, and new buildings erected without reference to any particular plan. Centaurs of the forest usually build permanent structures with heavy logs or planks set solidly on stone foundations, but they may even just burn them when they leave. These buildings are long and rambling with high ceilings, wide doorways, and large rooms. They are well ventilated, drafty is the term most humans would use, and have wood, hard clay or wooden floors strewn with sand or straw, storehouses, forges, smokehouses, and barns with separate structures, usually of a similar design, and usually very practical. They will set up storehouses and forges and things like that to build stuff when they need it, and it's mostly practical, so the smokehouses and things like that will be stocked up with whatever they're hunting to store up for provisions for coming seasons or coming treks where they migrate again. Centaurs of the plains live in sod huts or in large tents, depending on the permanency of the settlements, yurts. If a blacksmith shop is not available, the centaurs will trade for whatever services with pelts or leather items, woodwork, food goods such as grains, or their own considerable labour capacity, if they're quite able to lift and carry things very well. There's little furniture even in permanent centaur homes, they just have no need for it. They're quite comfortable leaning down or sitting down on a mat or something. Usually they'll have a few high tables, because centaurs eat standing up generally, and a few straw mats for comfortable resting, so they'll sit around, on cushions and things. Other possessions are kept clear of the floor, hanging on the wall or resting on high shelves or in cabinets, usually out of reach of shorter humanoids. Centaurs will go to considerable trouble to decorate their abodes with tapestries which are not uncommon. And any number of households may decide to carve or post a plank or some painting on a wall or dwelling. They, even though they're going to take it apart fairly soon, they just enjoy dwelling in there and spending leisure hours painting and decorating. Decorative floor coverings are unknown, since these would be soiled with mud and dust in short order. They just can't be bothered. Centaurs of the plains and grassy hills are primarily pastoral, and like centaurs, they are, like all centaurs, they're expert in determining when to move their herds so that the pasture will be sweet and full when they return. They don't concentrate their farming, so their livestock is usually just content to stay with them. They are contemptuous of humans who seem unable to use areas without overgrazing or moving more than they need. So grassland centaurs hunt and gather whenever wild plants and fruits are available. They're very good at finding them. Most of them have got proficiency in survival just as a racial trait. They may tend plots of grain and vegetables, visiting them only a few times between planting and harvest. But much of their grain they get in trade or warfare. Sylvan centaurs are fewer but more civilized, as their contacts are more with elves than with men. And, of course, the fecundity of the Feywild provides them with a lot of resources. They depend on hunting, but they also grow crops and keep livestock as well. Their fields are small, but very well kept, usually pastures or hayfields for their herd animals or small plots of oats or vegetables. And their livestock, they'll keep them well hidden. For what little they have, they can ill afford to lose. Visitors, seeing the lush and carefully managed fields close at hand, may be forgiven for mistakenly concluding that the rich grasses in them are intended for the centaurs themselves. This, of course, is not true. Centaurs keep a few domestic animals, other than cattle or sheep, or sometimes goats. They may even keep ostriches or desert animals, that sort of thing. Llamas in hills and things. They're often uneasy in the presence of horses and regard them in much the same way that humans regard monkeys, with even less interest. They just don't have a lot of use for horses and find the sight of horses pulling burdens or carrying riders disturbing at first if they've never seen them before, and are, of course, angered at the mistreatment of them. The thought of eating horseflesh is abhorrent to them, just as many humans would not see a sample a stew of monkey if they see a hand floating in it. Most centaurs like cats and use them to keep storehouses clear of rodents. However, they dislike dogs, which they find annoying. The sound of barking is unpleasant to them, and they react strongly to having their heels nipped. Dogs just tend to get behind them and get in the way and get underfoot. Cats are, you put a cat down somewhere in a nice sunny spot and it tends to stay there. Finding food enough to support a herd is a time-consuming task. Some groups of centaurs have a large area of land which is carefully farmed, providing the bulk of the herd's nutritional needs. The older colts, led by the best hunters from among the stallions, or even by some exceptional mares, often go on regular hunting forays during the greater part of the year. The mares in particular will show them how to best use bows and things like that for ranged archery and things, which takes a bit of more of a patient, non-emotional hand to teach young colts how to shoot. While a centaur farmer is stronger than a human and needs no beast of burden, still not 4 times as good at farming as is necessary. Though centaurs can eat rougher food, they must work long hours and hold more land than smaller farmers would to feed themselves adequately. And of course, they farm for the herd. Worse, the farmland that supports one centaur can support 4 or more of almost any other intelligent race. They are threatened not only by starvation but by sheer numerical aggression by human, demi-human, and humanoid tribes, who will, of course, steal what the centaurs work so hard to build, particularly as the centaurs move on so frequently. Finally, the settled centaurs lose an important advantage over potential enemies unless their fields and houses are well hidden, that of their mobility. Centaurs less tied to a locale always flee before superior numbers if all else fails. They're consummate guerrilla warfare fighters. They'll use their smaller numbers and their speed advantage to basically be elite light cavalry. Unfortunately, farming supports the greatest number of inhabitants in any rich, tillable land, so centaurs have retreated into still uncleared forests or into land that is more difficult to plough. The centaurs are well suited to hunting, gathering, and herding, activities that permit them to take advantage of their speed and range. It does not matter so much that they need more ground if they can cover it more swiftly, so they tend to range over large areas. If they tend fields, they're less dependent on them, since if they cannot grow or gather enough vegetable food, they can always trade it with the surplus from their herds or raid the granaries of hostile settlements. So yeah, they're more likely to actually raid orcs than the other way around. There's a price to be paid for this safety and more prosperous lifestyle in terms of isolation, but with their mobility, centaurs can make contact with other races as they please. In areas heavily populated by centaur tribes, annual or biannual festivals may be held where they invite other peoples to come and meet and trade with them, in which each herd sends a group of representatives made of its finest athletes, artists, warriors, and leaders to the gathering of the great herds. This is held in whatever area the stallion of the great herd happens to call home. This consists both of week-long political meetings amongst all the different herds, as well as an athletic and artistic contest amongst the best of the centaur race that they have to offer. So it's quite a sight to behold. At every third gathering, an election is held, where each herd having one vote to elect a new stallion to the capitalized form, which denotes the stallion of the great herds, so being known as basically the prime stallion. The candidates are chosen from amongst the very best of the herd war chiefs, and the votes are cast, and the winner is the war chief with the greatest number of votes. It's basically pure democracy. In the past, it was occasionally occurred that two stallions of equal merit had received an equal number of votes. The traditional procedure is to determine the winner in such a situation is by a pull-off, in which the two centaurs are harnessed together and must attempt to pull one another across a line. So, strength. Once the stallion of the great herds is elected, it usually follows that this entourage of females increases in number and that his particular herd grows in status, receiving better prices from other herds for their goods, and people basically flock to them because of their status. And the stallion is empowered to make certain, often minor decisions regarding the affairs and policies of the entire centaur population. So it's them that say, okay, it's time to migrate, or okay, it's time to go to war, as well as being required to settle disputes between herds and to handle interpretations of the herd law that cannot be taken care of by the lesser herd stallions. Although all centaurs are generally of an independent nature, they will risk everything for the benefit of their herd. This apparent contradiction has confused researchers for many years, but it makes good sense for the survival of the race, obviously. A centaur who is one day stands in direct opposition to his herd stallion will the next day give his life to save that same stallion for the greater good. So, go figure. Centaur laws are haphazard, unwritten codes within the communities. In a few herds, it is a crime to insult frequently any individual herd member. So, yeah, name calling. If a centaur is convicted of this, the maximum sentence is called tail shearing, where they literally chop the tails off. Cropped tails are often much in evidence after council meetings, unless this rule has been temporarily suspended. The drawing of a weapon against a herd member by an outsider, except in self-defense, is a crime punishable by expulsion from the herd environs. Use of weapons by one herd member against another, carries a maximum sentence of permanent expulsions from the herd environs, unless the offence was premeditated, which they rarely are. Attempted murder of a herd member is punishable by a maximum sentence of exile, although they have also been sentences of castration. Murder of either a herd member or an invited guest of the herd is punishable by death. Underage herd members breeding together is usually punishable by tail shearing, but not much of anything else really, just sort of public shaming. However, the breeding of underage herd members by full adult herd members is a serious crime. Again, castration is often carried out on the stallion involved. Hoarding of food or supplies needed for survival of the herd is punishable by expulsion or restrainment from breeding for as much as 5 years. Surprisingly, especially considering the drives of the normal stallion, it is if it's decided that a particular stallion has committed a crime and cannot breed with any mares, he almost certainly will obey the decree, perhaps because the fact that castration awaits any breaker of this decree is in effect, well, it's difficult to say, but they generally don't want to get castrated. I don't think any male really does. Although centaurs do not lie, often, they find nothing wrong with not telling the whole truth, kind of like a Spock lie. Such editing allows a centaur to avoid situations that could be dangerous to life or limb, and is quite acceptable as long as the guilty party is not caught. This, of course, applies only to normal situations in a normal sort of court of herd law. The telling of a partial truth is a serious offence when it's a matter of herd safety or herd law, and is usually punishable by shearing off the tail of the offender. A Centaur will never, except in dire circumstances, avoid the full truth when talking to a friend, unless that truth could cause needless emotional harm. With their great size and strength, regardless of their profession or their character class, always keep in mind that centaurs without any weapons can kill an average humanoid very quickly. They have hooves that they are proficient with as natural weapons, and also, they can most certainly attach metal horseshoes, so you can have magically enchanted horseshoes as weapons. And yes, centaurs can train up to become wizards. They're perfectly capable of learning any character class. The front 2 hooves count as unarmed strikes that do 2d6 plus strength modifier and bludgeoning damage. The back 2 hooves do the same amount of damage, but also the target must make a DC 10 strength saving throw or be shoved back up to 5 feet, which doesn't provoke an opportunity attack, unfortunately. I'd be quite willing to house rule that so they actually increase the DC based on the strength modifier of the centaur, which is kicking you backwards. Centaurs also make charge attacks. With a normal movement rate of 50 feet per round as a base walking speed, they are damned fast combatants. They can also, they just need a 30-foot straight line of movement to their target in order to inflict extra weapon damage of charge damage, so they can basically charge every single round. At first level, this is an extra 1d8. At 5th level, it increases to 2d8, and by 12th level, it maxes out as 3d8 on top of their weapon attack. And note, this also includes the Centaur's own hooves. So yes, in a single turn, they can inflict a potentially lethal kick attack on a regular humanoid. It's justifiable to fear being attacked by a Centaur. And of course, humans don't like the fact that Centaurs are often quite mercurial and sometimes unpredictable. Centaurs speak Elvish and can converse in Sylvan with Fey creatures. They don't often feel the need to become very fluent in the common tongue of humans and dwarves, so when they do speak it, they will do so with a heavy Sylvan accent. Also, when talking amongst themselves, they will usually mix Elven and Sylvan words quite freely in their own fashion, which often differs from herd to herd, so it's quite difficult to converse with Centaurs unless you're familiar with them. Centaurs are given personal names at birth. Some tribes reward Centaurs with a tribal surname as they come to maturity, basically based on their actions or, what they've done, or famous lineage, that sort of thing. So male names range from Jo, Rol, Ral, Vazir, Cathilk, Bizrin, Vithag, Aldrudis, Zing. Female names may be Belgus, Felre, Larish, Nelnath, Shirogret, Rizag, Lelras, Ina, Shiglek. Tribal surnames can be Thornbreaker, Oakenhoof, Vinemane, Starcatcher, Dustborn, Rocktree, Plainshopper, Grasswind, that sort of thing. In the continent of Faerun, a lot of centaurs come from wide-ranging areas around the central heartlands, so it's likely that any particular individual will simply say that they're from a particular forest, such as Chondlewood, Duskwood, Winterwood, Cormanthor, and so on. Personally, I find centaurs to be brilliant fantasy non-player characters and include them as player characters. Including them as player characters has resulted in my previous games or campaigns that I've been a part of in so many funny situations where their size and intimidating presence has been really entertaining. They are a culture that is not friendly with humans and dwarves, that travel widely and have a long and mostly unknown history, yet their race is as old as the elves and the dwarves. Their folklore and legends tell of times the humans can't even recall. Certainly a great people, not without their flaws, capable of real warmth and heroism. Just a reminder, if you've not subscribed already, feel free to do so, and be sure to hit that notification bell as I upload from the other side of the world sometime in your future. For access to all the scripts and Wayne Week advanced access to these videos, consider becoming a patron of the channel on Patreon from a minimum of $1 per month, and a hearty thank you to all of my existing patrons. Join the community on our Discord server and come say hi. I stop in there usually once or twice a week to have a chin wag with people. Also, if you want to pick up some new video game at a significant daily discount, help me out in the process, check out the daily deal on Chrono. They have a new game every single day, linked down in the description down below. The music on this particular video was provided with Bryce, from Bryce on the Discord server. Thank you very much, Bryce. As always, thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more for you very soon.